Hi, everybody. Welcome to Negotiating Salary and Benefits. Move it on to Jeremy as well.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is B. Awe. I am a learning and development consultant, and I've worked with a variety of different organizations, but I've also worked with a huge number of career changers, mostly folks who are transitioning into technology fields as junior software engineers, and equipping them with the skills to navigate that job search. But most specifically and relevant to this conversation is thinking about things like salary negotiations.
Okay, and hi everybody, I'm Jeremy Buenteo. I am a staffing lead at Google in Google Hardware and have spent my career in recruiting and talent acquisition in the IT industry in other companies and at Google, mainly hiring entry-level software engineers, developers, designers, and also on the business consulting side. So depending on your interests, I may have experience with offering jobs in your area. So happy to talk to you all tonight.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll just go ahead and get right into it. So you have your offer letter, you have that initial, pay rate, but it's not really what you were expecting. So what is the best way for folks to kind of go about this? Like, what is the first step? And we'll go ahead and start with B.
Yeah, so hopefully, you don't wait until an offer letter to actually have the conversation around salary, just like salary expectations. Hopefully that's something that, what I would think a good recruiter would initiate early on in the process. But if it is the case that you get an offer letter and, they're meeting you under to where you expected, I would say the first thing you want to do is email them and, first thank them for the offer letter. Let them know how excited you are to potentially be joining the team. And from there, you want to be very strategic about getting someone on the phone and start the negotiation process. And what I mean by that is you get to say that I was looking to be in the range of XX or, the range of 70 to 85,000, something like that. But it's really important that you have that conversation on the phone and not via email, because I think it makes it really easier for the recruiter or whoever's managing that process to just say no via email, right? So it's really important to personalize that and let them know. I always talk about the sandwich effect. Let them know how excited you are, and the meat is like talking about where you're wanting to be, and close out with affirming why you're super excited to potentially be joining this team. Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this?
Great advice. Love the analogy of the sandwich with the positive and then trying to negotiate and positive again. One thing that does is for an employer, it assures to them that you are in it for the right reason. And what you don't want to do is start off on the wrong foot. So you don't want to start a new job, even if you are successful in the negotiation, with a feeling with the folks that you're joining, whether it be the recruiter, the hiring manager, or others, that you were not tactful in your negotiation. So I think that's good advice. Also, by telephone is also very advisable. From putting myself in the candidate's shoes, you're able to have a much more dynamic conversation and to address your justifications for the negotiation. And to B's point as well, hopefully you've already thought about this by the time that you've had the discussion, but sending that initial email also does give you that time to put your thoughts together, put your justifications together. So I would say that if you do receive a congratulatory phone call from a recruiter that you are receiving an offer, and they give you an idea of the salary and benefits immediately, then I would say thank you and ask how much time that the company will give you for making a decision, and then say, great, I'd like to think about it, and then use that time to get back to the recruiter, perhaps schedule a time for follow-up discussion and have that discussion at that time.
Awesome. So in that time, you have to think about it. How do you go about building that list of reasons as to why you should be paid more? And we can start with B again.
Sure. I would say it's a combination of and you should have already did this in your interview prep, but going back through the job description and how, if there's like specific alignment there, certainly you want to bring those points up. Also, and perhaps we'll get into these later around resources that you can use and tools that you can use. But when I think about like platforms like Glassdoor or LinkedIn that give you, insights, or some insights, they can't give you the entire thing. Some data into like salary ranges and salary expectations. You can also, talk about industry standards, right? Like, letting them know that, through my research, I noticed that you all, or I trust that you all will be comparable or on par with industry standards in terms of pay, right? So I think it's a combination of doing your research or going back and doing a thorough job, giving, A, B, C, point by point of, how you match up with the job description, and also using the data that's available to you via things like Glassdoor or PayScale to kind of support that.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that, Jeremy?
Yeah, those are great data points to gather. I would say get as many data points as you possibly can to formulate your target range, both before the recruitment process and when you're ready to negotiate. Like B said, you want to have an idea of your position's target range when you're in the recruitment process, maybe not at the beginning when you're in an early stage of interviews, but before you start to finalize things, you do want to have that discussion. And like B said, a good recruiter will have that discussion with you just to make sure you're in the same ballpark, in the same area. They may not get it down to a dollar figure. However, you do want to make sure that you're in that ballpark. And to do that, get as many data points as you can. Use your network to talk to industry folks. It may not be polite to ask specifically about salary, but get their advice like you're doing now, watching this live stream, that I'm going for my first job and I'm trying to build my target range. This is what I've seen. What are your thoughts? Get some feedback on that. Glassdoor, LinkedIn, do take those with a grain of salt. They are very, very useful tools. However, they are not always verified. So take them all and, do it somewhat of an average. They should give you an idea, but for an exact dollar figure, don't be surprised if it's on one side or the other of what you've seen on Glassdoor. So just remember that. Building your data points within the market, as well as your individual justifications, whatever those may be, regarding your internships or projects or professor recommendation position. All of those can be good key points, especially for an entry-level negotiation.
Yeah. And also, one last thing I would add is that, if you're living in a super expensive city like New York or San Francisco, I would hope, I think it's really important to factor that into your kind of data that you're presenting to the recruiter that you're talking to, letting them know that you need to live, you need to survive, right? And so that's something to keep in mind as well. You want to be strategic of how you present that information, but it's very important not to negate cost of living.
Yeah, great point. And on the flip side of that, remember that as well. If you're at, NYU and you're getting an offer to move to Austin, factor that in as well. Right. So use online available calculators to see what your salary does with purchasing power in the market, in that local market. Good point.
Yeah, so I guess another thing to follow up with, the calculator idea, if you don't have those data points like on Glassdoor, how do you go about calculating that number? Do you just look for competitors and try to look for their Glassdoor salaries, or what does that look like? Jeremy, do you want to speak on this a little bit?
Yeah, if you don't have a specific figure for the company that you have the offer from, do look for competitors in the industry, whether it be Glassdoor or other results that you may be able to search online within the industry and within your experience level and also within your market. Employers will typically take three things into consideration when building a salary strategy, and that is, what does the market pay? What do other people in the company who are in the same job currently make? and then what are your qualifications? And between those three things, they'll try to arrive at a figure for you. Also do bear in mind that some employers, especially at the entry level, do try to get, how to say, ahead of or in front of negotiation by offering standard salary packages for entry-level positions based on the city. You know, maybe one number for New York and another number for Austin, but a standard package. So if that is the case, you know, you may want to prepare negotiation on some other aspects or benefits, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, do you have anything to add to that, B?
No, perfectly said. And I'm learning so much from Jeremy right now. So thank you, Jeremy.
Right. So I'm just like kind of wondering, like, Jeremy, since you're like on the hiring side, do you have any like horror stories about like how somebody could have handled a particular negotiation better, or a story where like somebody came in and absolutely just blew you away with like, here's why I think you should pay me more, I have these reasons. I would love to hear that story. And similar to B, if you have any stories about people that, you know, come to you and say like, this worked well for me and like I blew them away with this, or etc.
Yeah.
You want to go first, B?
Oh, please, Jeremy, you go first.
I do. I mean, you know, after having delivered a lot of offers over the years, it's a really exciting time, and it can also be an emotional time. So, you know, you may have some hesitation or doubt about relocating or taking a new job with a new company. Will you fit within the culture? Will you be able to pay your student loans off? You know, things like that. So you want to try to think about the whole package. Talk to the recruiter about the company's salary and full compensation strategy, because it may not be purely based on salary. There may be other aspects, including equity or benefits, that if, for example, an employer offers a better 401k match, you know, than another offer you may be considering, those are real dollar figures. If you get, you know, a 10% match on a, let's say you are able to save, you know, 10% of your salary of $70,000, and your employer matches that dollar for dollar, that's $7,000 in free money. And another employer who may be offering you $75,000 but doesn't have a match, well, you're already $2,000 ahead with the employer match. Saving and taking advantage of the employer match is something that you absolutely should try to do if you're at all able. Of course, you have to build a budget, but taking advantage of employer matches are free money, and your employer will consider that to be part of your compensation. So keep that in mind with your negotiations. Now, as to stories, I think it's important to stay humble. Like B said, you know, to be thankful, to have your list of reasons, and to affirm that you're very interested. Because I have had candidates who, based on any number of factors, their GPA, their school, their internship, say, you know, that I deserve X. And rather than saying I deserve, put the focus on what you feel you can deliver for the employer, because the employer has to have a good reason to want to increase your salary, especially comparatively to other candidates that may also be very willing to accept the salary as it is offered. So stay humble, you know, have your justifications ready. And I think doing that will put a favorable opinion of you on your recruiter or hiring manager, and that's how you can have a really successful negotiation.
Yeah, that is an excellent point around the total package, and something I feel like not a lot of folks talk about. So I appreciate you bringing that up. In terms of, I don't necessarily have horror stories, but I spent a good amount of my professional career in the coding bootcamp space, which I'm a huge advocate for first. So for folks who didn't necessarily study computer science, they go to these coding schools. And a couple of our students who are really eager to get their first start and looking at some startups. And this is not to categorize all startups, but startups who are still securing funding. And so the offer came in really low. And so I had a really difficult conversation with the student that I was working with, about having your walkaway number, right? Like, is it important for you to have this experience, or is it important for you to be able to survive? And we had to have that conversation. And the student ultimately decided to take the offer because she felt like having that experience was more valuable. So I share that story to say that, sometimes it's not, sometimes people choose to take the experience more than the money. And if you are situated in a space that you can do that, then I commend you, kudos to you. But I also know the reality for many folks living in these big expensive cities, that's not a reality for everyone. So that's kind of like the story that comes to mind when I think about horror stories.
Yeah, so I guess, salary is not like the only thing you can negotiate. Jeremy was saying you could possibly negotiate equity in a company. And I know different companies have different stock options. So what is like, if you can't negotiate for a salary, how can you bring that up, put that on the table if it's not already included in your offer letter compensation package?
Yeah, I'll take that one. And I just want to feed real quickly off of what B said about not so much a horror story, but the boot camp. Employers may offer a position to someone based on their experience. And the companies that I've worked with have definitely made offers to great candidates coming out of boot camps. And so have something more than just what school or what program you're coming out of, because that may not make the biggest difference to the employer. So, my point being, don't assume that because you're from a certain program that you're more or less qualified than other candidates who may have an offer. As far as negotiating outside of salary, the first thing that I do want to say is do be prepared to negotiate, or at least to open the door to negotiation. Again, do it tactfully and at the right time, but at least try, because if you don't, A, you don't know what you could have gotten, and B, you'll wonder if you could have done more. So do make an effort to have the discussion. It may or may not change or change significantly, but find that out. And if you don't get a change to your initial offer, then make sure you're satisfied with the salary and professional career growth that the company is offering. To B's point, it may be about the experience that you'll gain more than the number, but do make sure that you feel like you're going to grow and learn and be in a better position for the sake of taking the offer. About other benefits, usually an employer will have a standard benefit package based on the country that you're getting the offer from. For example, vacation days are usually standard based on your years of experience with the company, but every company is different. And if you're getting an offer from a startup, they're going to set their own benefits. So, that's certainly on the table for startups, and do bear that in mind. Because you may not be able to get a higher dollar figure, but you may be able to get a better work-life balance or vacation package as an alternative. And as to equity, very important to make sure you know what you're getting into with regard to stock options. Look them up online, understand how they work, understand when you would receive them, when they would vest, because they may not be available to you in cash until a year or two or more after you've been with the company. And look at the trend of the stock price for the company, and bear in mind for startups, to Chanel's point, if they are still securing funding, sometimes you don't want to be too bedazzled with equity, because 10% of what may be nothing in the future is less than 1% of something that's already proven its value. So just be careful with regard to equity offers and make sure that you see a stable growth curve for the company.
Yeah, and I would add, things that you can also negotiate for it besides like the monetary value that you're bringing home. Professional development, and as Jeremy mentioned, for some organizations that number might be set. But if you're coming into a more organization that is still establishing itself, you can potentially negotiate for that. So thinking about your professional development in the organization. Gym stipends. At my last company, they paid for my gym membership, which is huge because I feel like gym memberships are so expensive in this city. Commuter benefits, always a plus. Again, whether in New York or San Francisco, I know the BART is extremely expensive, and in New York, the MTA is kind of expensive too. So it's like if you can get, and have your employer consider taking that expense off your plate, that's money that you save in your pocket, right? And so maybe your takeaway number, your come home number is not where you want it to be, but the fact that they're covering those things, in my opinion, it makes up for it.
Yeah, awesome. So like we've talked about things that you could potentially negotiate for upon entering a new role, but what does the negotiation process look like when you're already in your role and you're looking to make more money? Like when is the appropriate time to sit down with your supervisor and say, hey, I need to make more money? B, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. And in full transparency, I negotiated my first salary like 3 years ago, right? And so I'm still very much learning as I go, and that's why I appreciate having Jeremy in the space. But in my previous company, we had quarterly reviews, and based on that quarterly review is when you were determined if you were eligible for a raise. And similar to what Jeremy and I were talking about earlier about coming with your data points around XYZ, once you're already in the company, it's really important to come with those data points and talk about how you've exceeded expectations, or how you surpass your KPIs or OKRs, whatever your metric of success is in the organization. Come prepared to talk about those things. But I think either quarterly or annually review is the perfect time to start having that conversation. Maybe not your first quarter in the job, right? Because you're still getting situated, but use those times. And I think it's okay to have that transparent conversation with your manager, thinking about, hey, I really want to grow. If you're exceeding expectations or meeting expectations, have that proactive conversation with your manager. What do I need to do in order to get to X or whatever that is for you? But have that proactive conversation. But always, once you get in the job, keep track of your successes, right? Because those successes you can pull from later on when you have that annual quarterly review with your manager to say, here's the justification of why I should have this raise. But Jeremy, I would love to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, for sure. 100% agree there. Keeping those and shamelessly pulling them out during those reviews. Keeping a file in your email of every, whether it be your client or your colleagues or your managers giving you positive feedback. And also a history of the contributions that you've made to projects during that quarter. I think that there should never be a time that you do not have a good sense between you and your manager of your career development plan. Don't ever let it be something that's in the dark. Your employer may have a schedule that may be annual, semi-annual, or quarterly, or something else. But if they don't, then take it upon yourself, like B said, proactively have that discussion with your manager. Go in and say, this is where I am, this is where I want to be next, and what exactly are my OKRs, KPIs, or to-dos in order to get there. Have that discussion, and it can be a monetary discussion as well, because what you want is to be able to get your salary discussions done and in a place where you're satisfied and feeling good, so that you're engaged and able to do your work and focus on bringing your full self to work, and less so on making sure you're going to be making ends meet. So if you are in that position where you're worried about your compensation, your salary, it's here today, and make sure that you've discussed a plan for you and your manager to get there over time. Afterward, document the discussion with your manager and say, okay, here's what I understood from our discussion, so that you can refer back to that 6 months down the road.
Yeah. So is there a such thing as like asking too many times for the opportunity for a raise? Because I know some folks, they don't want to come off as too needy. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah. I mean, I think that when you have the discussion with your manager, you should also make sure you understand the timeline. So during that timeline, during that meeting, you can make sure okay, we'll talk again in 3 months. And during those 3 months, you can make sure you're hitting all of your marks. And then before that, your manager probably will not be able to make any new changes that you didn't discuss already, especially because things like salary cycles or budgets may be constraints. So know what those are, find out from your manager or HR what that schedule is, and then just proactively work to the schedule. I wouldn't go more than the discussion more than the schedule that you've set with your manager, unless you just need a checkpoint on, here's what I've done. Am I doing okay? That's certainly fine. But as far as your comp, set a schedule with your manager and stick to that.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I totally agree on the timeline and the importance of documenting everything as you go.
Yeah, most definitely. I guess another thing that I know a lot of folks kind of fear in the negotiation process is that companies will rescind the offer. So has there ever been a time where you've had to do that, or is that just like not a common practice? Because I know it's a common fear for folks.
Unless something drastic has occurred, then it's usually not good practice for a company to rescind an offer, especially if it's a large MNC, one that has a brand that's already known, because doing that is something that would attract more negative PR for the company than it would whatever savings or concern that they had about the individual offer that you have. So I would say if it's a large company, it's probably not too much to worry about. You do want to, be respectfully, diplomatically assertive in your negotiation. Try and get what you can up front, because once you're there, it's a little bit harder to get increases, from after you've started. So I wouldn't worry if it's a large company, but we have seen, even some publicly traded companies have pulled offers for entry-level candidates or future employees. And I mean, it does happen, but I wouldn't let that detract from your negotiation. Just be respectful, understand the employer's value proposition and how that meets your needs.
Right. And I haven't necessarily seen offers be retracted, but I have seen folks join a smaller organization and are soon thereafter let go because companies didn't have a good grasp of their budget. And certainly I don't see that with the larger companies, thankfully. But again, it happens rarely, but there are students that I've worked with that has been the case. And so the conversations comes around negotiating for severance. And everyone's not able to negotiate for severance, but it is something that you should keep top of mind should you be in that predicament.
Good advice. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess like going off of that, like, should you just automatically negotiate for severance, like upon signing on? Like, is this something that you should just always be thinking about? Like, hey, like, I know this is a smaller company. I saw like this blog post about how y'all just acquired funding, but it was like the only blog post I saw about funding. So like, how does that even come up? Because I feel like if I were to say like, what kind of severance package could I get? It kind of I'm worried it might come off as me like trying to leave like
Right.
a bag of money.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have that conversation on the out front. I think only when, if and only when you are in that position where that conversation around budgets are happening and there, you know, there's layoffs and things like that, that's when you want to equip yourself with that. So I want to say come into the organization. You want to come into a brand new organization, focus on how you can succeed and, you know, hit those metrics. But I think, again, if you're in that tricky predicament where they are laying off folks, I think that's the time where you want to, you know, have that proactive conversation with perhaps a manager or, yeah, definitely. I think it definitely needs to be with a manager, but it's something, yeah, don't keep that in the forefront, but also keep it in the back of your mind as something that to think about. And this doesn't happen all the time, but I just want to share so that folks are aware of all the different dynamics that can come up. Because actually the organization that I worked for 2 years ago, they went under, like completely under, and we were given our severance packages. And my manager, who was an incredible person, who still is an incredible person, he's like, B, you need to negotiate everything. He told me we need to negotiate that number. We negotiated the number. So our walkaway was pretty decent. Not after taxes, but pretty decent. But it's just something, you know, the negotiation process never, for me, I guess, never really ended, even when I came in, but also at the tail end of the organization, you know, dismantling itself. Dismantling is kind of harsh.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that? Have you, like, Jeremy, have you had experience where someone like right at the bat just wants to talk about severance, or like, do you have experience with somebody approaching you within already at the company, like worried about something? I know you worked for IBM and Google, so they're like larger corporations, but I'm curious to see if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I haven't ever had that come up in hundreds of offers in at the outfront, like B said. And it's important to bear in mind, if you're working in the United States, that it isn't an employment at will country, or check the local laws for your state or municipality, because most of the time that can be, you know, depending on local employment law, you know, you can be let go, and it's really up to the employer what kind of severance that they give. So yes, never stop negotiating, but I wouldn't say it's something to discuss at the outset. But if it does come up, yeah, definitely something that could be negotiated, maybe depending on, you know, the circumstances.
Yeah, and I know, kind of switching topics here, B, you said that the first time you actually negotiated a salary was 3 years ago. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what kind of fears did you face? Did you just not think like negotiation was a thing? Because I'm sure like a lot of people can share the same sentiment. Or like, what did that transition look like? Like, at what point did you realize I can ask for more?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, and ironically enough, right, like last week was Equal Pay Day, which brings attention to equal pay for women, which women are, you know, earning significantly less than their male counterparts. And so I think I had internalized that I should just be grateful to be here, right? So I didn't deserve to ask for more. And one of my really awesome coworkers, who is phenomenal at negotiating, she's like, dude, you need to ask for what you're worth. You're worth more than that. And she just empowered me to think to finally to embody the fact that I did deserve more. So really, I think for folks who are like struggling with, I'm afraid to, hopefully you're watching this. And secondly, get around a community of people who are going to remind you that, yes, you deserve more. There's so many awesome Google groups, Facebook groups, so many online communities that will support you in the negotiation process if you're unsure about it. But I think, it comes with believing that you're worth the number that you're asking for. And from there, you know, get a community that's going to affirm you and like help you tactfully walk through that process. And hopefully we're serving as that community for you today.
Yeah, Jeremy, I know you recently switched positions too. Did you have any experience with negotiating at Google?
Yeah, I'll tell you my personal story, and then I'll also say, I totally agree with B as well. Having that affirmation group, you know, something that we mentioned earlier, do be prepared to negotiate. You know, do take the opportunity to negotiate. You may not get anything, but you may have a better idea. Okay, this is the value that the company is going to provide to me. So it's important that you at least give it a try. And if nothing else, you've got practice, because negotiation improves with practice. Also, I recommend doing some role play with friends, family, colleagues, because you want to be prepared to tactfully respond to the counters that you may get from an employer. So either do it in your head, and something that I do is I think, okay, if I say A, then my manager will probably say B. So how will I respond to that? Because most of the time you, especially after you get a little bit of experience, you kind of have a feel for how the conversation will go, but practicing for it is definitely something that can improve the outcome. And then my negotiation and changing positions, I definitely took that opportunity and had the discussion with my recruiter. We talked about the total compensation package, and just to be completely transparent, my offer didn't change post that discussion. However, what did change for me was that I understood more about the company being paid for performance, and that I felt confident that I can come in and I knew what I could deliver, and that I would thereafter be able to get increases or equity refreshes based on my own performance. And I think that's a good culture to try to find among employers, because it ensures that, we've all been there in a college class when you've had a group project and somebody was kind of not pulling their own weight. So you don't want to be in a company culture where folks are being rewarded based on just their tenure or other things that are not really performance driven when you're working your heart out. So to me, that was important for me to accept my offer.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing. I definitely had, okay, so I guess like in your role, like having recruited, have you noticed any like shift in the way that negotiations have occurred over time? And then also on the flip side for B, like how has your own negotiation process like transitioned over time? Like you found your worth and then took ABC steps. So we'll start with Jeremy.
Yeah, it definitely has changed over time. Negotiation now is in the last, I'd say 3-4 years, and it maybe is a generational thing or just a social thing where with communities like Reddit or groups online, these things are discussed pretty openly, whereas historically, generationally, or what have you, people were it was more personal information, so it was not shared as openly. There's different schools of thought about that, but if amongst you and your fellow students, classmates, friends, what have you, are openly discussing that, that can help your position. However, do be take into consideration the company's request. What you're being offered may not be the same. I mentioned standardized offers earlier, but they may not be standard, and what you're being offered may not be the same as another friend, and there could be reasons for that. And you want to be careful about what cans of worms you may be opening. So that's a major thing, though, that has changed. Negotiations almost standard, and there's a lot more open discussion of it.
I definitely agree around folks being much more candid around it. I see, and this is not everywhere, but I see a lot of folks who are much more willing to talk specifically about their salary, but more importantly, how they were able to get there, right? So the tools, the strategies, the techniques they were able to leverage in their negotiation process. So that's definitely a switch. And I'm grateful for that switch, because I think, it tends to be, back in the day, it was something you never talked about. So I appreciate that folks are actually able to talk about money in a way that's productive. I think what is hurting, Jeremy so eloquently spoke around being humble earlier. And I think that's super important because I think with the rise of social media is great, but like just because you have XYZ followers on whatever platform does not necessarily always translate to your performance in the office, right? And so I think you have to get real about, you know, yes, if you can get 1 million followers, right, how does that relate to the work that you're doing and why should they give you the raise? Make that very clear for the employer on the other side. But don't just think coming in, oh, because I have this, I deserve this, right? And so the humility sometimes can get lost in it, but I appreciate that people are actively having the conversation in an open way.
Yeah, and then I guess I see some questions coming in. Emmeline from our community asks, for me, I want to know, as a newbie in content writing, community manager, freelance, are there as many as there are out there? What are skills most sought out to get a decent salary? Do we have any?
What was the role again? She's a freelancer?
Yeah, so content writing, community manager, freelance. What are some skills sought out to get a decent salary? So I'm guessing like maybe like what should she highlight? Or anything along those lines, if you are in a freelancing role, perhaps?
All right. I think you definitely want to highlight the content that you've created, but also most importantly, particularly if you're leveraging it on social, what are the metrics supporting it, right? Like how many viewers or unique clicks were you able to get? I think those are the skills that folks want to see. So when you're able to add metrics to the skills, I think that's going to be the justification you use to say this is why, you know, and typically with freelance, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I know they offer like hourly rates, right? Not necessarily like salaries, and I could be wrong. But you can then look to use those metrics to kind of justify why you're needing to be in this XYZ range. You know, 50 to 60 or 100 to $150 an hour or something like that. But use the data that's coming from the content that you're producing to kind of leverage why you need to, or why you deserve to be in that ballpark range.
Yeah, anything to add to that, Jeremy, before we move on?
No, sounds good, especially, you know, the data and the metrics to justify the value that you'd add for the company. Yeah, absolutely.
And so Jared from our community asks, is it still taboo to job hop in order to get a higher salary, considering the research below? And he links a Forbes article that says employees who stay in companies longer than 2 years get paid, I want to say 50% less, is what the headline says. But I don't have it open up, but like, how is it still taboo for folks to like job hop? And, you know, how are companies like Google approaching, like, millennials are known for like job hopping. So how does Google kind of tackle that in their processes?
I did see the question and the link to the article. So the short answer to that question is no, it's not taboo. The longer answer is make sure that the risk of doing so is worth the reward, and be prepared to discuss every transition that you make in your career with a potential future employer. And an answer that says, I left so that I could get 5% more is not enough of a reason to justify the move. It may be okay once or even twice, but if we do start to see, and I don't want to speak on policy, but I do, you know, want to say from my experience, my personal experience in tech recruiting, you know, if you start to see several changes in a short period of time, it can give an employer some doubt into what your motivations are. So you want to be clear that this is the job that you want to do and that you want to do it for the foreseeable future. That being said, it shouldn't preclude you from getting an offer nor from negotiating. So it's not taboo, but just be prepared to justify it and discuss it. And one last thing that I'll say about the article is that it assumed a 10-year career. And actually, careers are much longer than that for most people, unless we're lucky enough to retire super early. So careers are long. So, you know, I think limiting the research to 10 years worth of a career, yes, if you job hop several times during that span, you could get more than somebody who stayed, but that's because it's such a short span. So, you can't job hop for what would probably be a 20+ year career so many times.
Got it. Anything to add before I go to the next question?
No, nothing to add there.
Perfect. Okay, Sahar from our community asks, when the recruiters call for the first time and ask you about the desired salary, what should I answer?
So I have multiple opinions on this. I think you never want to give the first number. And I saw an interview with Bazoma St. John of Uber recently, and she was like, throw out the number. And I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. You should never give out the first number. So I think for me, as someone who's coming from not the talent acquisition side, I would, say something like, I want them to give out the first number, essentially. So I would say something like, I trust that you all will meet industry standards. I'm more so focused on, figuring out if this is a good fit for me. But I really caution folks to throw out the first number, because then you trap yourself, right? Because if you said 75 in the very beginning, and if you didn't write that down, towards the end, when you get your offer, you get that $75 offer when they were probably going to come up way more, but you just saved the company a ton of money, right? And I know some organizations have like actual real practices where they won't be that shady, but I have seen people do that. Or they'll say 75 in the beginning, and then later on, they'll resurface the conversation around salary and say another number, and the recruiter's like, well, you said 75 on December 8th. 2018, right? So you don't give out the first number, and if you do, write it down. Make sure it is very visible and clear in your notes, so that you don't look like you're, going back and forth. Well, yeah, just don't give out the first number.
I would 100% agree with that from a candidate's perspective. Yeah, you want to not give out that first number. You never know how it might limit what you might receive. So 100% agree with that. And use that in any negotiation that you're doing, whether it even be, buying a car or something like that. So, never give out that first number. And yeah, I would agree with that. And also, as a recruiter, I've seen some major jumps in expected salary once a candidate knows that the company is interested in making them an offer. So I've seen major jumps, and you don't want to play games. The company is interested in you. Again, you don't want to start off on the wrong foot. So what you should do is discuss or have that competitive industry salary in mind. Let the company throw out the first number, get the offer, and negotiate from there. But don't put a number out first, to B's point. And when the company's giving you signals that they're interested in making an offer, don't make it, 30% higher than what you discussed, or I just threw out a number, but because that shows that you weren't really serious in the first discussion, and that's not the impression you want to make.
So actually, upon researching this topic, I see a lot of sites say don't throw out 40,000, throw out 40,127. Does making the number more specific actually change anything? Because I definitely came across that a lot in my own research on negotiations. So I was curious if y'all had any thoughts on that.
So I think when you actually present a number, I think for me, it's important to present a range, and the end or the end of your range should be, kind of like the goal, and the beginning of the range should be, minimally what you can live off of, right? So thinking about, we talked earlier around, where are you geographically located, right? What does the cost of living look like? And so that range should be mindful of those things. So don't just give out a single number. I would provide a range, and that way, if you're lucky, because you in theory, you set yourself up for success, that, you have the bare minimum that you need to survive and do okay. But also on the top, if they meet you anywhere in the middle, that's they've in many ways not necessarily exceeded your expectations, but at least, you're still in a really good place financially. So think more strategically about the numbers that you're providing in that range. But I would always say provide that range and make sure that, you're accounting for where you're living, cost of living, and student loans and things like that.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
I'd agree with that. The range, the goal, the minimum at the bottom of the range, the goal at the top. And yeah, I think the point of those articles is to be thoughtful about what you are asking for and that it's justified based on your experience in the industry and not just throwing out some round number because it sounds good or you would love to have that.
So if you do find like that salary on Glassdoor, say it's like 45,000, is there like a recommended percentage that you should shoot like above that as far as like asking for more? Like no, you should ask for no more than 20%, or is there any advice in that front?
I don't think you harm yourself by asking for more than you expect to receive. And that goes to B's point, letting your range be aspirational. And be prepared to justify that range based on cost of living, what you may have in terms of student loans, et cetera. But be prepared to justify that end of the range. And then the bottom end of the range is for yourself to understand, this is the minimum that I would be willing to accept. But if the company comes back with the bottom of that range, then you know that you may be getting lowballed. And so therefore, be prepared to say, I'm slightly, diplomatically, say that you were hopeful that you would be closer to an average within the industry. Your research indicates that that's X. And so you would, like to see if you can get closer to that and get the response from the company. So asking for more than you expect to receive, nothing wrong with that. I'd say it can be useful. I don't know that there's a hard and fast number not to go above. Just be reasonable within your market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I guess kind of going off of the idea of lowballing, AK from our community asks, is there a reason some people get lowballed when it comes to salary? For instance, is there something you do in the interview, like being too enthusiastic or seem too flexible regarding the hours you're willing to work, etc.? And basically, can you seem needy when you're just trying to be humble in that process?
Well, enthusiasm during the interview process is never a mistake. Definitely, I would always encourage that. And the goal of the interview is to receive an offer or to get another interview. So if this is a job that you're truly interested in, take advantage of your time and effort and try and get that job offer. And that could include enthusiasm. It could include teaming and adaptability. Those are all things that all companies want to see. If you receive a lowball offer, it shouldn't be because you were an enthusiastic job candidate. It may be the company's budget, and you should negotiate from there. I think you want to assume good intent when you receive an offer and just use negotiation tactics that we've discussed to get to where you want to be. Don't withhold your enthusiasm to try to make yourself seem, a scarce commodity. Do everything you can to get that offer, and do everything you can if you want to get multiple offers, to compare against each other. But, you want to bring your whole self to the interview.
Yeah. And actually, Chanel, if I may, Jeremy, I would love to know or just hear your thoughts on, using competitive offers. So like if you have multiple offers on the table for you on the talent acquisition side, does that dictate anything? Or is it more important on who the offer or where the offer is coming from? Like, what does that look like on your end?
Competitive offers are very important. Now, don't feel like you can't negotiate if you only have one offer. So, do try to negotiate based on your qualifications and the market, even if it's the only offer. But competitive offers are certainly consideration in negotiation. And it may be relevant whether that's with a competitor, because if it is in an alternate industry, then the employer may wonder, which do you really want to do? Which direction do you really want to go? So if it's an entirely different industry, they may be less inclined to negotiate or to change your salary or compensation. So, definitely bring those up, but only do that once you have the offer in hand. Never assume that you're going to get an offer. Don't ever make any decisions until you have something in writing, and then you can bring up your competitive offer. It's okay to also bring it up if you have a deadline, but I would recommend trying to get extensions on the deadline, and then to respectfully ask for extensions, not to drag it out unnecessarily, and then let the other company know your deadline, but don't disclose your offer until you're in the negotiation process. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you said a lot of important things, but I think the biggest thing is like getting the offer in writing. Like, so some companies will call you and say, congratulations, we love you, we're extending the offer, which is great. And I'm like, yeah, I'm so excited. And send me that in writing, right? You always want to have the offer in writing. Verbal is cool, but it's not enough. And I think also one of the things that we don't talk about enough is like, feeling empowered to walk away. Particularly if the company, and everyone should always negotiate. If you take one thing from this session today, know that you should always negotiate, because not only does it set you up for success later on, but also it shows your sense of being able to advocate for yourself. But after you've negotiated and you realize the company is not coming up on the number, it's okay to feel empowered to walk away. And it may be difficult, right? If you are really in dire need for a job and things like that, I think that looks different, and maybe you have to take it, and that's okay. But for the folks who, knowing your worth and knowing your value, I think sometimes it's okay to say, okay, well, I'm just gonna continue hunting.
Yeah, thank you so much for both of those valuable inputs. I just want a couple more questions from our community. Fully asks, how do you negotiate salary that an organization is offering below your expectation, and you know that the company is willing to pay more if you're a better negotiator? And then also, when same person, when a recruiter asks you about your salary expectation, should you also ask them what their range is before answering their question? I think we kind of did touch on this. B, you said that you kind of flip it by asking why I trust that y'all will be up to par with industry standards.
Yeah, I just go back to this piece around, you don't want to give the first number. And, some recruiters, Jeremy, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, some recruiters need to get that number in order to, if it makes sense to even pursue this candidate. Like if you're way out of their range, then it may not make sense. And so some folks are, prepared to like battle you on this to get a number. And that's when you present the range, not a single number, but a range. And so I think you get to say things in the beginning, like, I'm really excited about this opportunity and, learning more and assessing the fit. And I trust that you all will meet industry standards. For me, that's my go-to. But Jeremy, I would love to know what you think.
Yeah, agree, because a recruiter has a relationship with the hiring managers or the other interviewers, and they're going to be using their time to spend to interview you. And it will reflect negatively on the recruiter if after a positive interview, the candidate was somebody who was way out of the range. So totally agree, don't give a single number, be reasonable within the market. And yeah, I think you covered it perfectly.
And then the last question we have time for, Brittany from our community says, I've had interviews where the recruiter did not ask what my desired salary was, but rather flat out asked what my current salary is. What is the best way to answer that question?
That is a great question. And if you live in New York State, Massachusetts, and I think I don't know if it's all of California or just San Francisco, they shouldn't be, no recruiter should be asking you about your salary history. But if you don't live in one of those states, I happen to live in New York, so it's something I haven't thought about in a while. What have I done? Jeremy, I invite you to, talk about this one.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would use the exact same counterpoint that you gave advice earlier, which is that I am looking for a competitive salary in this industry. So I've researched that to be between A and B. You know, that's kind of sidestepping the recruiter's question, but it's one that they probably shouldn't be asking you. In some cases, they absolutely shouldn't be asking you, but it's becoming less of a common practice because companies don't want to discriminate based on experience. I would try not to answer that question, to put it back on the market. If the recruiter pushes back on you, it's okay to respectfully say that you're not comfortable to disclose that information.
Perfect. Well, that kind of brings us up to the hour. Thank you so much for being here. Just something, I know some folks might watch this later on, and I always ask, would it be okay for folks to reach out to you via LinkedIn or email? And if so, what is the best way to kind of ask follow-up questions, if that's appropriate?
Definitely LinkedIn for me, B-I-E, last name A-W-E-H. Make sure you send a note that said that you are in the Uncubed session, and that signals me to like respond with some sense of urgency as soon as I can. But make sure to leave a note.
Yeah, ditto for me. Same, LinkedIn, and if you could mention the session, absolutely. Yeah, happy to help.
Sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye.
Thank you.